I had this really painful betrayal from my family, thought I did everything I needed to do to heal from that. And then it happened again a few years later. This time it was my husband. So that was the deal breaker. Got him out of the house, looked at the two experiences thinking, what's similar here besides me? And realized, I never really took my needs seriously. Boundaries were always getting crossed. And I'm one of those people that believes if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I always went to books or courses or mentors to help me. There wasn't anything. So this was so big that I decided I needed to study it so big. So 4 kids, 6 dogs, a business, and I found myself enrolling in a PhD program and did a study on betrayal just to help me heal. That study led to 3 groundbreaking discoveries, which changed my health, my family, my work, my life.
Welcome back to another episode of the Kronos Group Podcast. I am your host, Jerry Brazie, and today I have with me Dr. Debi Silber. Let me tell you about her. She is the founder and CEO of the Post Betrayal Transformation Institute and the creator of National Forgiveness Day. She also is a 2-time #1 international best-selling author, an award-winning speaker, and the host of the podcast From Betrayal to Breakthrough, which ranks in the top 1.5% globally. Here's what makes her work different. It's the research and the experience behind it. Debi's PhD study uncovered that betrayal isn't just emotional pain. It's a completely different type of crisis that impacts the body, the mind, the identity, trust. Shows up how people work and their relationships, often for years without realizing why. So she has identified 5 predictable stages that we're going to walk through how you can heal from these things, understand that they're there, and it's commonly known today, post-betrayal syndrome, and why unhealed betrayal quietly sabotages your health. This should be interesting. And let's see, why does it heal the same way as grief or loss? What it actually takes to move on from surviving to being fully healed. We'll ask her all of those questions. Debi, I appreciate you coming on the podcast. Great to have you here.
Thanks so much. Looking forward to our conversation.
Let's go with the usual, let's get the podcast started conversation. Before you got into this, tell us about your background, part of the world you grew up in, kind of where you grew up, those sorts of things. Tell us a little bit about yourself before we get started.
All right. Well, I was a New Yorker who was really never supposed to live in New York. I don't have the ability to handle that from my nervous system. It just didn't agree with me. So I'm bicoastal between New York and San Diego every couple of weeks. But I was in health and mindset and personal development. I'm in business 34 years. And then I had this really painful betrayal from my family, thought I did everything I needed to do to heal from that. And then it happened again a few years later. This time it was my husband. So that was the deal breaker. Got him out of the house, looked at the two experiences thinking, what's similar here besides me? And realized, I never really took my needs seriously. Boundaries were always getting crossed. And I'm one of those people that believes if nothing changes, nothing changes. So I always went to books or courses or mentors to help me. There wasn't anything. So this was so big that I decided I needed to study it so big. So 4 kids, 6 dogs, a business, and I found myself enrolling in a PhD program. And did a study on betrayal just to help me heal. That study led to 3 groundbreaking discoveries, which changed my health, my family, my work, my life.
How does one study such a thing?
I went into it saying I want to study the mind, how the mind works, how we can heal, and really what drives people to do these things. But when it was time to do a study, that was really about then it was a question of, let me dive into studying betrayal. And when you're doing a study, you have to find the gap in the literature. What hasn't been studied yet? And there hadn't been a study on the deeply lived experience, the before, the during, the after, the physical, the mental, and the emotional of people who've experienced betrayal. So that's the one I did. And it was really just to help me heal, be there for my kids, my clients. But there was a moment where I just remember saying to myself, I have no idea how I'm going to heal from this, but if I can, I'm taking everybody with me.
I've, as I said when we talked before we started the podcast, and I've said this before, I had you on because I was so interested in this because it's just something I know so very little about or have thought that much about, to be honest. Is this Does this manifest itself more for females or males? Is there, again, in my circles, I don't hear it. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. So I thought maybe it's something that's more specific to females than males, or do you see it across both sides?
It's males, females. It doesn't just choose one or the other. But what happens is what we've seen is men are a little more quiet about it. There's so much shame. There's so much humiliation. There's embarrassment. And I see this very often in business, because even though you may not really know about betrayal, there are people within your work day, within your work life, within your work space who are experiencing it. And you can look at it, you look at them and you may think, oh, wow, they're lazy, they're checked out, they're burned out. Very often classic signs of unhealed betrayal. You could see it, the leader of an organization, they're micromanaging, afraid to delegate, completely exhausted, overworking. Those are signs of an unhealed betrayal too.
So how does that differ? My background is I come from I was born into abject poverty. I've been shot, stabbed, beaten within an inch of my life more times than I can count. And so I've experienced pain and trauma probably at a level most people have not. And so I'm curious, how does that betrayal, is it fundamentally different from other traumas, and how those traumas might manifest themselves? Or I guess there's two questions in there. And then how, if the answer is no, how does one manifest itself versus another?
Yeah, actually, that was the first discovery, that betrayal is a different type of trauma that needs a different way to heal. And, think about it. Let's just take, your traumas are a bit different. We'll talk about those. But let's take death of a loved one. Let's say it was someone you loved and they passed. You grieve, you're sad, you mourn the loss, life will never be the same. But you don't necessarily question the relationship. You don't question your ability to trust. You don't question your sanity. With betrayal, you do. And with a lot of other traumas, there's the shattering of life as you've known it, right? And the invitation is rebuild your life. With betrayal, not only do you have to rebuild your life, you have to rebuild the self. Belonging, rejection, abandonment, confidence, worthiness, trust. They're all shattered with betrayal, with something like a house fire, right? That's not necessarily the case. Now, with a lot of yours, I'm not sure who it was that did that to you, but if it was someone close and it was someone you trusted, that's betrayal.
Yeah, I wonder if, in my life, it was just, I was a street kid at 17, living with hookers and heroin addicts in a $25 a week flop house. So life kind of threw all of that at me. It came from me from many different ways. And I wonder if certain trauma like that, particularly as a child, because again, back to my original point, I'm kind of fascinated by this whole subject, because I don't know that I've had, I guess by the way that we would define betrayal as happening, employees have stolen from me, family members have stolen from me. I've had all of that. But I wonder if that background, in a way, didn't help me grow calluses about how to deal with these other kind of betrayals. And I ask that because, not that this is a therapy session for me, in dealing with so many entrepreneurs throughout my life and having done everything that I've done in the business world, these are things that come up all of the time, specifically what you're talking about and what I'm talking about. My employee stole from me, or I had a more than one relative work for me, and they came up with schemes to steal fuel and then lie about it, or just all of those things that come up. They went behind my back and tried to do things. But that's my story, but that's everyone's story that are in any kind of successful entrepreneur. It seems to happen a lot. So I'm trying to ask, while it sounds like a therapy session, I'm trying to ask from that context, because I think this should resonate with a lot of entrepreneurs. So back to my original question, could it be that we grow calluses if we grow up, say, like I did, against these sorts of things carrying on for us once we have to deal with them?
Yeah, it's really likely that if you've grown up in a way where you didn't feel safe, you didn't feel protected, you felt rejected, abandoned, all of that, moving into adult relationships, it's not that they're good, it's that they're familiar. It feels very similar, feels very familiar. So it's a known space. You're like, oh, I know how this works. I get it. Now, a classic sign of an unhealed betrayal is a repeat betrayal. So very often the faces change, but it's the same theme. So we go from boss to boss to boss, or partner to partner to partner, friend to friend to friend. We say, what the heck, is it me? Yes, it is. Not in that. It's your fault, in that it's your opportunity. There is a profound lesson waiting and needing to be learned. And until and unless we get that, we're going to have opportunities in the form of people to teach us. Now, wise trust is something we absolutely have to learn to rebuild. But one of the biggest things that happens is we don't, and I don't believe trust can be repaired. It needs to be rebuilt. But what happens is, with a shattering of trust, with betrayal, let's just say, so often we don't like that feeling. We just want to get back to business, get back to doing what we have to do. So we want to trust in someone again. But what happens that we often neglect is, we've had a shattering of our self-trust. We've had a shattering of our own perception of reality, what we thought was real and true, so many things like that. And if we don't rebuild that and just go for rebuilding our trust in people again, it's very shaky. It's a very shaky, unstable foundation. It's like building a completely new structure on a bed of sand.
So to that end, you said that I think in doing my research for you that betrayal is as we said, a different kind of crisis. It requires a different way to heal. What happens when people try to use the traditional methods, say, for healing, not unlike what you said relative to somebody dying or something along those, in that context, or what mindset approaches on betrayal? To how do you deal with trauma?
Yeah. So typical approaches, someone will go to therapy, really, really common approach. Now, these can be well-meaning therapists, but this is where the third discovery comes in. Very often that person will feel heard and validated and understood. They're not an inch closer to healing. And what happens is, the longer we do that, the more we are cemented into our experience and into our story. And we're not healing that way. And then it's almost like like one of those really cozy old sweaters. We forget we have it on. And we stay there for years, decades, a lifetime. We also treat the symptoms and not the real issue. Like, here's a story. We had a woman in our program. She was in her mid-80s. This was a 70-plus year betrayal. She was adopted. Her family didn't tell her. It was like one of those. So 70-plus years, she had a digestive issue. 45% of everyone betrayed has a gut issue of some kind. 70-plus years, she has a digestive issue. She is going to doctors and different protocols and different everything. 2 weeks into our program, healing the betrayal, she healed from a 70-plus year digestive issue. That's what happens when you deal with the real issue. What other people do, sometimes they numb, avoid, distract. They go to a doctor who puts them on a mood stabilizer or anti-anxiety medication. They'll drink. They'll be emotionally eating. They're overworking or over-exercising. Those are the most confusing, because you can look at it and you're like, well, it's good for me, right? But if you're doing that to avoid healing what's really, at the root of the issue, it's going to keep you stuck. Some people go to a support group. Now you found your people, and you will actually many people sabotage their healing because they found their people. Very often we're afraid to outgrow our betrayer. So we'll sabotage our success, our healing, because we're afraid of the unknown. And I'm happy to share the stages. Stage 3 is the most common place we get stuck. And it's because it feels so much better than the shock and trauma we just came from. We think it's good. And because we don't know there's anywhere else to go, we plant roots here, we park here. We're not supposed to. But then because we're here, this is where we land and stay and set up shop, and this is who we become. And then so often, we become afraid of leaving this space because we've rebuilt to some extent, and we feel like we're on solid ground again, and we're like, no, I'll take it, even though the only benefit of it is that it's familiar. That's it. It's not good. It's just familiar.
It sounds like it works a lot. I broke my back when I was 19 years old. I've had 17 procedures on my spine, and in that time, I was addicted to opioids for 25 years. I simply couldn't walk without them for very long. But they would give me steroid injections years ago, and it would work. And it was fascinating because it would come on and I would feel immeasurably better. And I'd be better for 2 or 3 months. And then 4th month, it would kind of go away a little bit. And by the 5th month, it was back. And when it came back in the 5th month, I swear to you, and this happened to me half a dozen times, the pain was so much worse when it came back after leaving. Now, I dealt with that pain for decades, but when we got it to go away, when it came back, I was like, this can't be the same pain because it's so much worse than it was before. The reality was the pain was exactly the same. It just went away. And so my ability to deal with it and get used to it and familiarize myself with it had to start all over again. In a way, it sounds like that's what you're describing.
Yeah, well, and pain, when our body's screaming, it needs the support, it needs attention. It's very often trying to let us know something's not right here. And so we medicate, we suppress, we do all we have to do just so we can, get back to our day. But it's when we stop and pay attention, we realize, okay, what is this? What is my back trying to tell me? What's this pain trying to tell me? Because, and it'll hit the weakest link, that's typically what happens. But yeah, we absolutely, do our best to numb, avoid, distract. I have a saying that I've been saying my 34 years of business, and it's hard now, easy later. Easy now, hard later. Take your pick. It's going to be one of those two. When it comes to betrayal, it is all about hard now, easy later. And we don't like that. So what we do is we choose so often easy now. And by easy now, I mean numbing, avoiding, distracting, more of the same. We're uncomfortable. We're in pain. We're hurting physically, mentally, and emotionally, but nothing's really changing to create a different result. When I say hard now, I mean taking on every single belief, every single thought, every single response, and saying, is the new me that I'm creating now, does this work, or was this part of the old me? The only parts of the old me I'm taking with me are the parts I love. The ones I've outgrown, the ones that no longer work, they're not coming along. That's hard work. But when we do, we build a version of us that never would have had the opportunity to be created, had the experience not happen. That's trauma well served.
Yeah, I think the acknowledgement that you can, entrepreneurs in particular, a lot of people, but entrepreneurs in particular, have an ability to cope with their reality. And we kind of say, and again, you're coming at it from a different perspective, but from my side, it's, change today what we changed yesterday and change tomorrow what we changed today if it needs to be. And your normal is just this, and you correct me if I'm interpreting this wrong. There might be underlying issues, but we just get used to dealing with the stress. I think the 5 stages of betrayal. The first one is kind of like the shock or the trauma, or you kind of dismiss it out of hand, and it becomes survival mode in a way. And we just get used to survival mode. What you're saying though is that there's ways you can affect change to where you can operate up here and not have to battle down here. But we think that down here is the new normal, and that is survival mode. I don't want to put words in your mouth. That's how I interpreted when I did my research.
You know what? Yeah, a really simple analogy here. Imagine 2 friends and they both have 40 pounds to lose, right? They both look good. They put themselves together. They go about their day. It doesn't really affect much. They're okay, right? But one friend says one day, I'm so done with the weight. I'm just done. And goes on this healthy eating journey and exercises and all the things. And now let's say it's a she. She looks great. She feels great. She goes back to her friend. She's like, I feel so good. Come on, I'll help you. And friend number 1 says, no, I'm okay. I get it, right? But the other one has the experience and says, this feels so much better. That's the difference between stage 3 and stages 4 and 5. If people knew for a second what stages 4 and 5 felt like, and not only felt like, what it would do for their business, what it would do for their relationships, what it would do for their health, they wouldn't waste a minute in stage 3. But it's the unknown. So yes, they've managed to survive their experience. They're going about their business as usual. They're keeping things afloat. They're managing, their kids, aging parents, their work. But what they don't often realize is how much better they'd be at all of that. When I have yet to see someone stronger than someone who is truly healed from betrayal, because you are intentionally and deliberately creating a version of you that's stronger, healthier, more discerning. I mean, there's so much that's been rebuilt that, can you imagine taking those new qualities into anything you're doing in business? It's a whole different experience.
My listeners will recognize this. A few years ago, 2022, I lost 110 pounds in 8.5 months. And I was laying in a hospital in November of 21 dying. And so I'm now I just turned 57 a couple of days ago. I'm the healthiest I've ever been in my entire life by far, completely changed my life. And here's what I said about this is why your example is will resonate with my listeners is because I say forever that health is downstream of, or excuse me, success is downstream of health. It's not that you can't be successful in the kind of shape that I was in because I did it, right? But oh my God, it would have been so much easier. I think I would have executed so much better. I would have been so much more effective had I lost all of the weight 10 years ago than losing it 4 years ago, as an example. And then to make your point on the flip side to it, now I teach people, if you could get in my head, you're trying to lose weight, the 50 pounds or whatever, however many, two people need to lose the 50 pounds. If you could get in my head for 5 minutes and understand how I feel today and my outlook on what I did to lose that weight, you would see that the sacrifice you had to make in losing that weight is cheap to the outcome, and that you can operate better, right, in a better place mentally, physically, emotionally, spiritually, when your weight is under control and you can bend over and tie your shoes. What we're talking about here then is it's easy to see the weight, all right? It's on your body. The clothes don't fit. You don't like how you feel. We need to then figure out how to recognize that mentally, which is not quite as easy as looking in the mirror and seeing that you need to lose some poundage.
Right. It's the thing with betrayal is it's physical, mental, emotional, psychological, spiritual. And the most challenging is we assume, well, if it happened years ago, it can't possibly be with me today. And that's not the case at all. We've had over 100,000 people take our post-betrayal syndrome assessment to see to what extent they're struggling. And there's a question on the quiz that says, is there anything else you'd like to share? People write things like, my betrayal happened 35 years ago. I'm unwilling to trust again. My betrayal happened 40 years ago. I can still feel the hate. So when we're just counting on time to heal it, it doesn't work. So now, for example, 84% of everybody betrayed has a trust issue. So think about, just bring that into your business. If you have a trust issue, how will you be with your boss, your coworker, that collaborative partner? You're not showing up the way you would if you've rebuilt that trust, right? Or confidence. Your confidence is shattered. Well, if your confidence is shattered, how are you going to put yourself out there the way that you normally would if you felt better? If you sell, how are you going to sell your programs, your products, your services if your confidence was shattered? That's one of the biggest things we see. And this is what I see with men a lot who are coming into the PBT Institute with, just their work was plummeting. And it was because that unhealed betrayal was they were anxious. They couldn't think, so they couldn't sell. They were hyper vigilant. They had brain fog, like all of the things that really prevented them from working and being successful in the ways they wanted most.
Yeah, that's interesting too, because I think maybe, and I'm just thinking this off the top of my head, some of what we attribute to just normal stress of running a business, being an entrepreneur, the risk and the sacrifice and the stress, all of those things that come with it, probably embedded in that somewhere. I think you talk about insomnia and panic and numbness. I mean, really, in a way, if a guy's hammering away or a girl's hammering away on their business, they're probably dealing with a bunch of these sorts of things. And that might be masking that expectation that this is part of dealing with being an entrepreneur, may be masking some of the effects from the trauma manifesting themselves once they're put under that pressure.
Yeah. Like, for example, there was and I'm happy to share some of the stats from the post-betrayal syndrome assessments you could see. But I remember working with a woman, and she was telling me all about, she's like, oh, let me tell you about my new health plan and my new fitness program and all of this. And she's like, that's great, right? I'm like, be great if that was your problem. It's the same thing with overworking. If that was the issue and you were trying to, boost your business and you have a whole new business plan, so you're working differently, that's one thing. But when you're using those things to outrun betrayal, it doesn't work. You can't outrun it. It will follow you wherever you go, in your health, in your work, in your relationships.
So those 5 stages, then we've got stage 1. Let's go ahead and walk through those if we could, and just kind of briefly outline what they are. And I might interrupt and maybe give an idea of how that might manifest, or if you have an idea, I'm sure you probably do, just so it gives somebody something that they might grasp onto and go, oh, wait a minute, I experienced that. I thought it was this, maybe it's that.
I think the betrayer was right, who knows, right? And now, because it feels so bad, but we have to get back to work. We take care of our kids, right? We have to go back to business. Right here, we start numbing, avoiding, distracting. So we do it for a day, a week, a month, food, drugs, alcohol, whatever, right? Now it's a habit, right? We do it for a year, 10 years, 20 years. And I can see someone 20 years later and say, that drinking you're doing, that emotional eating, that overworking, do you think that has anything to do with your betrayal? They look at me like I'm crazy. They say it happened 20 years ago. All they did was lock themselves in stage 3 and stay there. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yep. Yeah, I think that I'm starting to get a better picture of it. I'll tell you a quick story, and I'm glad we're having this conversation. When I was 14 years old, I was taking some money out of a bank, and I got robbed. 4 guys got me, and they put it to me really good. Broke my nose, broke 2 ribs, beat me almost to death, rolled me under a bus stop. I woke up a couple hours later. This was in August. I got on a bus. I had to take a bus all the way home. I got off the bus. I have a 1.5 mile walk. This was Portland, Oregon. Every time I go to Portland, about every third time I go to Portland, which is once a month, I will go to this spot just to remind myself of this event. As I was walking home, again, beaten down and feeling the way that I did, a voice outside of my head and behind me, so much so that I thought it was in the duplex right next to me. Someone was yelling at me through the window because, again, my eyes are black. I got blood down my front. And the voice said to me, everything is your fault. And this is, I don't know, God, Buddha, Jiminy Cricket, my conscience, Confucius, I don't know who it was, but on my children's eyes, I've told the story 1,000 times. It was outside of my head, so much so I thought it came out of this duplex. And it turns out, not seeing anybody, I turned to it and said, how can it be I didn't do it? What are you talking about? How's it my fault? I'm a poor kid from the streets. And it said, everything's your responsibility. If you don't take responsibility for everything that happens to you in your life, you're going to be like everybody else. That was it. I walked home and had to heal my nose over days. It was broken and all kinds of issues that came from it. But and that lesson didn't take right away. But over the next 10 years, as I started to kind of climb out of the situations that I found myself in, and I got older and a little bit more mature, it started to resonate, so much so that my son was born at 28. I started my first business, which immediately went south. But I learned the lesson that kind of all came together, that everything is my fault. So I was giving... as a poor kid that grew up in that environment, poor people in that environment give all of the power to everybody else because it's everybody else's fault. And so one of my superpowers that I have been teaching forever, relative to success in business and in life, I've been married for 28 years, is that I take responsibility for everything. So if I get hurt, I did it. So when someone lost $100,000 for me, working for me, I looked at it and said, what did I do upstream of that gave them the ability to lose my $100,000 through some mistake they made, either on purpose or on accident, whatever it was? Meaning I dealt with them however it needed to be dealt with, if they were stealing, so on and so forth. But I took, at least to me, it felt like I took all the power away from everybody because I made everything my fault. So as I hear you talking about that, where you start to blame everybody else, for me, that epiphany, particularly in those formative years at 14 years old, in that environment that I just described, had a really powerful impact on me that has made me, has been a huge part of my success, which is, I've lost fortunes and made fortunes, and the stress that goes with that is immense. But I think maybe that's a way lends itself to why I was so interested in talking to you, because I have so little idea about what it is that you're teaching.
Yeah, but what you said here, I stopped at stage 3. That is one of those pivotal signs that someone is leaving stage 3 and moving into stage 4. It's that taking responsibility. Because if you're blaming everyone outside of you, how can you ever own the responsibility of, let me create the life I want based on, yes, I was dealt some really hard stuff, but how do I transmute that and use it to my advantage to create this version of me that's using all that pain as a catalyst to my transformation, one of the biggest things we can do to move ourselves to stage 4. So stage 4 is finding and adjusting to a new normal. Here's where we recognized, even though it happened to me, it's not about me. It's about those other people, right? We're owning, where was I in this scenario? What can I do differently? Not that it's my fault, but what can I do to just make myself stronger, wiser, better for next time? So stage 4 is very forward moving. And, it's interesting. It's like if you've ever moved, right? Notice how you don't take everything with you. You don't take the things that don't represent the version of you you're ready to become. And there's this one spot as people leave stage 3 and move into stage 4. If their friends weren't there for them, they're not coming along. Like that therapist who's just keeping you stuck, you're done. That, all of those people who you felt brought you down, you're done. The betrayer who's not changing, you're done. And people ask me all the time, Dr. Debi, is it me? Yes, it is. You're undergoing a transformation. And if they don't rise, they don't come along. So stage 4 it's like the caterpillar's going into the cocoon right here, goes in alone, doesn't go with a whole big party, right? But it gets to be the butterfly because it was willing to go through that, that tough spot. Anyway, when we settle into this new space, we make it cozy, we make it kind of mentally home, we move into the 5th most beautiful stage. And this is healing, rebirth, and a new worldview. The body's healing, self-love, self-care, eating well, exercise. The mind is healing. We're making new rules. We're making new boundaries, discernment, wise trust, right? And we have a new worldview based on everything we see so clearly now. And the 4 legs of that table, in the beginning, it was all about the physical and the mental. By this point, we're pretty solidly grounded because we're focused on the emotional and the spiritual too. Those are the 5 stages.
And so from start to finish, if you were to put a timetable on this, is as you work through your process, what would somebody anticipate? What kind of effort are they going to have to put into doing this? And then secondarily to that, what kind of time frame should they expect before they start feeling better? When you're losing weight, you can kind of put, lose a pound a week, and within 3 months, you're going to be down 20 pounds and you'll feel better, whatever the math is. Are you able to put a timetable on that and give an idea of the amount of effort someone needs to put into it?
Yeah, I usually it's 6 months when I'm working with somebody, and I only work with high achievers, people who are like, I'm done. I want to be through stage 5 in 6 months. It has more to do with willingness than time. If someone has a vested interest in hanging on to their old story and all the people that go along with it, they're not going to heal. In fact, there were 3 groups in the study who did not heal. I want to make sure I share that. But to answer your question, it has much more to do with willingness than time, any day of the week. But there were 3 groups who didn't heal. 1, this was the group that was numbing, avoiding, distracting. It may have made the day a bit easier to get through, not without a price. They didn't heal. The second group, this was the group, they had their story, they were sticking with it. They were deeply rooted in stage 3. The third group, this was the group where the betrayer had very little consequences. So whether it was out of financial fear, religious, reasons, not wanting to create a shakeup or a change, the betrayed did all they could to turn the other way, look the other way. And I saw 2 things with this group: a further deterioration of whatever type of relationship that was. And 2, this group was the most physically sick. Really common. So it would be like in your case, if you saw your relative and you knew your relative was stealing from you and you just turned your back on it and tried to be okay with it, the physical symptoms, besides mental and emotional, that would have developed over time would be classic to someone not having consequences for the betrayal.
Yeah, and I'm one of the other topics for my listeners always is I'm always trying to pull people out of places where they are, and the 4th stage into the 5th stage reminds me, the cocoon, to use your example. When you grow up in abject poverty, everybody around you is poor, and no one wants to see you get out. This might be subconscious. In many cases, it's conscious of them because they don't want to see you do better. So you stay down there, everyone commiserates, everybody's got somebody to point at. And as long as you stay in there, even if you've got an inkling that you want to come out, your family, your friends, your community, your counselors, your teachers, there is this push to keep you down where you are. And I have said for years, I had this epiphany at 28, I had to leave everything behind if I was hoping to move forward. And so I did that. I, used to play sports and watch sports and talk sports and drink at bars while playing and watching sports. And I mean, it was, everybody was comfortable, and it was all my boys I grew up with. And I had that realization that I needed to move on from that. It was critical for my life, leaving those people behind, as difficult as it was. I made the snap decision and did it in a matter of months, but it was a critical turning point for my life, for how I looked at the world. I looked at the world one way 1 month, and 2 months later, I looked at the world very, very differently, to use your example.
Yeah, I use an example of, if you've ever seen crabs in a bucket, you don't have to put a lid on. They are very happy, crawling all over each other. And then there's always that one sort of hopeful crab, trying to climb up the side. And what happens? There's always one that just grabs it. It's like, nope, I'm not going. You're not going. Very common. I did 2 TEDx talks, and the first, Stop Sabotaging Yourself. And I used 3 examples, and one of them was very similar. It was a guy who would go every Friday night, meet his friends out. They would have a drink and complain about their jobs and their wives and all of it. And then he realizes, I'm so done with this. I'm going to dive into the world of personal development. And he was lit up and so excited about it. So he started sharing it with his friends, and they looked at him, like he was crazy. So what did he do? He abandoned the personal development and drank more. And this is very often what we do. We don't want to outgrow our people. It takes a lot to do what you did, where we're like, no, this is not a healthy environment for me. But what many people do is, I'm going to sabotage this new path because of the known familiar, even if it stinks.
Yeah, I agree with that. Also, I must say, in hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of interviews, it's the first time I've ever been called a crab.
Not you. That's the experience.
So there is a pressure when you go through something like this, at least from my side, you can tell me if I'm wrong, to forgive quickly, right? And there's an inclination, in particular, I think, from the male side, to just move on. It doesn't matter, and we go different, and we just leave it behind, or at least we think we do. What's the difference between, or how do you know between kind of premature forgiveness and actually doing the healing? Because I'm assuming that distinction matters.
Yeah, well, as the founder of National Forgiveness Day, September 1st, I'm a big believer in it, although it has nothing to do with the other person. It really has to do with releasing the power that all that pain has over us. But what happens is, when we think it's this big, like, ta-da, one and done kind of move, it's not. It's a practice. It's something we need to do over and over again. But when we forget, now, forgiving and rebuilding are 2 very different things. Forgiving has everything in the world to do with us. Forgiving and rebuilding has so much to do with the person you're rebuilding with. And I remember reading a study when I was doing my own, and it said, if you feel safe and valued and you forgive, you feel better. And if you do not feel safe and valued and you forgive, you feel worse. And like I said, I believe forgiveness has everything to do with us. So when you think of rebuilding and use the same criteria there, if you feel safe and valued and you rebuild, you may feel better. If you do not feel safe and valued and you rebuild, you feel worse. So when we forgive for the wrong reasons, for the wrong time, it's not the time. It does. It backfires every time. There's a really important, in the 5 stages, forgiveness has a place, and it's later on in the stages, definitely not earlier.
How does somebody, go back again to my experience and my roots, how does somebody differentiate between true betrayal and perceived betrayal? Because, again, as I get older, and I think maybe the advent of social media and the so many conversations that I have on a regular basis, it seems to me that there is a lot of what one person would perceive as betrayal, somebody else might, look aside at and go, what in the hell are you talking about? How do you differentiate between the two? How does somebody not, fall for that trap?
I define it as the breaking of a spoken or unspoken rule. And every relationship has them. And the way it works is, the more you trust it, the more you depended on that person, the deeper the betrayal. So, for example, a child who's completely dependent on their parent or caregiver, and they do something awful, that's going to have a different impact than your coworker taking credit for your idea, right? Still, betrayal is different level of impact. But it's the shock to the body, mind, and heart. That's what differentiates betrayal from a different type of trauma. But here's the thing. If you perceived it as a betrayal. It was a shock to you because maybe it was an unspoken rule, but maybe you were the only one who knew it. And your partner, your child, your parent, whoever didn't. Whenever there's a shock, whenever you feel like that someone is lifting a mask off and showing you who they've been, and it wasn't who you perceived them to be, that's where the cleanup needs to happen.
How much of that experience or people's experiences I think about like my dad, his life and my mother's life, they're both 87 years old, was way more difficult than mine could ever imagine. And my grandfather was, born in the late 1800s, and his life is unimaginable to me. And my great grandfather fought in the Civil War as a 16-year-old, and so their lives are unimaginable to my life and unimaginable to my children's lives. How much expectations should one have to deal with some of these things just in the general course of life, understanding what we're capable of?
Well, people are doing the best they can with the tools they have access to. So the idea is you never want to waste a trauma. If the trauma happened, you want to look at it and say, okay, let me take a look at who did it and what I can extract from this to do something so much differently and to break the chain. It's so easy to fall into the trap. Oh, this is what I know, so this is what I'll do. It is so much harder to say, this is what I've seen, and it stops with me. And it's deliberate and it's intentional. And when I said hard now, easy later, that's the kind of thing I'm talking about. Of course, no one intentionally set out to say, hey, I'm going to have a child and I'm going to do my best to hurt them as much as I can. But from where they came from, they may be looking at it and saying, you're infinitely better and have it so much better than I ever did. So that's a home run. And in their mind, it could have been. But the idea is people are they're working from their lens, from their capacity. And as long as we realize it has nothing to do with us, but what can we do with it? That's how we heal.
I get asked, Jerry, what's the secret to success? Or, what the young guys in particular, what's my success? How did you become successful? And I say that I am who I am in spite of where I come from, but also because I'm of where I come from. And one is not more than the other. And that is to say that even though that seems like a dichotomy, the reality is that so many of the things that I experienced as a kid growing up and those life lessons have helped me today, right? And so surviving so many of those experiences were beneficial. They were no fun going through them when they happened and having to live that. But at the same time, the good times and the bad times made me who I am. And so I lean on some of those stories, some of those experiences, again, growing businesses and doing all the things I've done over my career. What part does hardship play between where it's affecting you negatively and it's helping build you up and kind of, helping you callous?
Yeah, it's huge. And I don't believe in callous because that's when we become hardened. We want to become healed. But you know what it's like? It's like a pendulum. People try to live right here under the radar, and I don't believe that's where greatness is ever found. What happens is with trauma, any trauma, there's a hard swing one way, right? Now, the idea is here's where you get your thoughts together. You lick your wounds, but you don't stay here. And when you're here, you now have the momentum for that hard swing in the other direction. And thought leaders, any thought leader of our time, they've done this and they teach us how they did it. That's the benefit. You can't get the momentum to be here from here. So the trauma absolutely serves the purpose because it allows for the hard swing the other way to the transformation.
It seems clear that you cannot skip one of the stages. You have to work through all 5 stages, and in particular, the first 3 seem to be the most important, and number 3 seems like that's kind of the tip of the hill before you go down the other side.
Absolutely. It's like you've heard of the hero's journey. It's when that hero meets the villain and they fall into that pit. That's not the end. It's the one who says, that's it. I'm going to figure out a way. I have no idea how I'm going to do it, but they just do this. Think about it. It starts like this, right? Then they crash. They don't end here. That doesn't exist anymore. Now it's this. That's the opportunity, and we never want to miss it.
So maybe that is, I'm sure you've seen people go from that deep traumatic betrayal, obviously, into real transformation. the changes that somebody, once they get there, obviously it's emotional, spiritually, as you keep saying. I got to assume they're going to be better leaders, husbands, wives. They got to relate to other people, better friends, better parents.
Absolutely. I have seen new businesses birthed. You can't do that when you're stuck in trauma. New passion projects, new levels of health, new relationships, because you are a new version of you. You just don't attract the people you used to. You don't tolerate what you used to, not in an angry or avoidant way, in a whole, healthy, healed way. Your collaborations are so much better. Your relationships are so much deeper. You're leading from such a place of grounded authority, not from force, just from this strength of the person who's been there and back and has lived to tell.
Yeah, I agree. In the last few minutes we have, how does somebody, or maybe we could pick just one thing that recognizes, that somebody could recognize in them, say, hey, I kind of see that. You know, to your point, you pointed out some things where it kind of manifests itself, and we may think that it's just normal, but it's not. Is there one thing in particular that you could, a physical symptom that people rarely realize, but you think it's tied to that betrayal?
I mean, there are so many that are so classic, but a common, just to look at, if I were to say, what's one thing? Are you numbing, avoiding, distracting? Take a look at why. What is it that you're running from? What are you trying not to see? When you answer that question, that could start the beginning of the healing.
What's the biggest myth about healing betrayal?
That time heals it. It doesn't. That time heals it, and that therapy will heal it. If I tell you how many people would come into the PBT Institute with therapy trauma, well-meaning, well-intentioned therapists, but that person is feeling heard, validated, and understood. They're not an inch closer to stage 4. In fact, they're gluing themselves to stage 3.
And is there, people confuse healing that actually, well, let me ask this a different way. What's the hardest truth someone has to accept to be fully healed? What do you need to go through? If you had to pick one thing, what would be your quick answer to that question?
It's a reckoning of your old self as you deliberately and intentionally create something new. And it's, you can't be afraid of that, because it's the death of the old. That's the only way you birth the new.
People confuse that healing with something else. I mean, do they think that they're healed, but it's really, I don't know, a hot fudge sundae and makes them feel better, and they think that's healing?
Yeah. Yeah, it's like the people who say, I'm healed as long as I don't see them. That's not healed. You want to be healed, not hardened. Very different.
So what is one daily practice that someone could do to help support, kind of, it seems like it's overwhelming the way you describe that, right, to somebody listening to this, that it's that complete, that complete change into that butterfly, but first you have to go into that cocoon. That might seem overwhelming. Is there something daily just to get started that we could tell the listeners this is something that might really help support that real transformation?
Yeah, I would say this, it's a mantra. And if you have to say it a million times, it's worth it. Even though it happened to you, it's not about you. Because as long as we think it's about us, we're living a life of stage 3, acting, reacting, creating from a stage 3 place. But when we realize that it's not about us, someone else's behavior isn't about us, we take our power back, we can begin to heal.
I think that to a lot of entrepreneurs, what we've talked about here today, I think will resonate. And what I want them to hear, because this is what I heard, is that a lot of the things that we think go along with being an entrepreneur, but it is probably true in all of life. It just, maybe it's magnified, when you're under the lights of trying to run a business and people you're responsible for, everything rests with you. I think if they feel that way, maybe take a deeper look at it, reach out to you, which we'll go through that, how they can get a hold of you. But it seems like it might require some work on their part, but it may not be as superficial as, I have a payroll coming up on Monday. That's where all the stress comes from. That's why I'm overeating.
Exactly. And it's, that person who is running their business from stage 3, if they knew for a second how successful their business would be in stage 5, they wouldn't waste the time there. They just wouldn't.
I love it. Debi, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you. I know you have the pbtinstitute.com, pbtinstitute.com, so they can go there to get a hold of you. Any other way of getting a hold of you, your socials that you'd like to tell everybody?
Yeah, so it's, as you mentioned, it's as in Post Betrayal Transformation, the pbtinstitute.com. Debi Silber, Debi, Debi, Silber with a B, and I'm everywhere.
Very good, and we will put that in the show notes. Very, very informational. I enjoyed that. Like I said, I want to be honest with everybody. I try to bring people on that I know what I'm talking about, and the ones when I don't know what I'm talking about. And sometimes the ones I don't know what I'm talking about turn out to be the most interesting for me. So this was very interesting because, again, coming into this, I had no idea what you were talking about. So you've brought some clarity to that. I appreciate it. I enjoyed it.
Thank you so much.